in the most secure vault beneath the Israeli Prime Minister's residence, behind 3 layers of biometric locks and military-grade encryption, Netanyahu kept a document so explosive that it could topple the most powerful man in America. What was in that file? The answer would shock you, but first, you need to understand how this deadly game of political chess began. It was March 15, 2023. The Jerusalem rain drummed against bulletproof windows as Netanyahu sat alone in his private study, his weathered fingers tracing the edges of a manila envelope marked classified eyes only. Inside this envelope lay evidence that could destroy Donald Trump's political career forever. But how did the Israeli Prime Minister obtain such devastating material? And more importantly, why hadn't he used it yet? The story actually begins 3 years earlier, in the gilded halls of Mar-a-Lago, where 2 of the world's most controversial leaders were about to forge a pact that would change everything. What happened during that secret meeting? Hold that thought, because the real shock comes when you discover what Trump unknowingly handed to Netanyahu that night. Netanyahu's acquisition of this document wasn't planned. It was pure chance, the kind of political accident that shapes history. Picture this: Trump, relaxed and confident in his Florida mansion, sharing classified information with someone he considered an ally. But what Trump didn't know was that Netanyahu was recording everything. Every word, every admission, every damaging detail about operations that could bring down the American presidency. But here's where it gets interesting. Netanyahu didn't just record their conversation. He also photographed documents that Trump carelessly left on his desk. Documents that revealed the true extent of certain financial arrangements that would make your blood run cold. What kind of arrangements? The kind that involve offshore accounts, foreign interference, and payments that violate every campaign finance law imaginable. You're probably wondering why Netanyahu would risk everything to obtain such material. The answer lies in understanding the man himself, his paranoia, his survival instincts, and his absolute belief that information equals power. For Netanyahu, this document wasn't just leverage, it was insurance. Insurance against the day when his American ally might turn against him. The weight of this secret began eating away at Netanyahu's inner circle. His closest advisor, someone who had served him faithfully for over a decade, would later describe the atmosphere in those days as suffocating. The Prime Minister had become increasingly isolated, trusting no one completely, always looking over his shoulder. Why? Because he knew that possessing such explosive material made him a target. But the document revealed more than just Trump's potential crimes. It exposed a web of international corruption that reached into the highest levels of government, involving arms deals, intelligence sharing, and financial kickbacks that would make Watergate look like a parking ticket. The implications were staggering, not just for Trump, but for the entire geopolitical balance of power. Netanyahu's paranoia intensified when he realized that others might know about the document's existence. Late-night calls from unknown numbers, suspicious vehicles parked outside his residence, cyber attacks on his personal devices, all signs that powerful forces were trying to locate and destroy his leverage. But who was hunting him? American intelligence, Russian operative, or perhaps someone much closer to home? The tension reached a breaking point during a seemingly routine phone call between Netanyahu and Trump in September 20. What was supposed to be a standard diplomatic conversation became something far more sinister when Trump made a veiled threat that chilled Netanyahu to the bone. "You know, Bibi," Trump had said, his voice carrying an unmistakable edge, "sometimes people hold on to things they shouldn't. Sometimes those things can be dangerous to their health." Netanyahu understood the message perfectly. Trump somehow knew about the document. But how? Who had leaked information about its existence? The Israeli Prime Minister found himself in an impossible position. Damned if he used his leverage, damned if he didn't. Using the document would destroy Trump but invite retaliation. Not using it meant living under constant threat of exposure or elimination. The document itself was a masterpiece of incriminating evidence. 37 pages of proof that Trump had accepted illegal payments from foreign governments, including detailed bank records, encrypted communications, and photographic evidence of cash transfers. But the most damaging section, a recorded conversation where Trump explicitly discussed selling classified military intelligence to the highest bidder. As 2024 approached, Netanyahu faced an agonizing decision. Trump was gearing up for another presidential run, and polls suggested he had a real chance of winning. If Trump returned to power, What would happen to the man who held his darkest secrets? Netanyahu knew that presidents have ways of making problems disappear permanently. The psychological toll was evident to anyone who knew Netanyahu well. His wife Sarah noticed how he'd wake up in cold sweats, muttering about insurance policies and mutual destruction. His security detail observed how he'd changed his routes unpredictably, never following the same pattern twice. Even his meals were being tested for poison, a precaution that hadn't been necessary since the early days of his political career. But Netanyahu wasn't the only one feeling the pressure. Trump's behavior became increasingly erratic as election season heated up. Sources close to the former president reported that he'd become obsessed with neutralizing threats and had been asking pointed questions about the capabilities of American intelligence agencies. The implication was clear. Trump was preparing for war. The breaking point came on a cold December evening in 2023. Netanyahu received an encrypted message that made his blood freeze. The document must be destroyed. You have 48 hours. This is not a negotiation. The message was untraceable, but Netanyahu knew exactly who had sent it. The question was, would he comply, or would he finally use his nuclear option? What happened next reveals the true character of both men. Netanyahu, faced with what amounted to a death threat, made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of backing down or striking first, he chose a third option that no one saw coming. But what was this mysterious third option? And how did it change the entire dynamic between these two power-hungry leaders? The answer lies in understanding Netanyahu's ultimate strategy, one that went far beyond simple blackmail or mutual assured destruction. You see, the Israeli prime minister had realized something that Trump hadn't. The document was more valuable as a known unknown than as a revealed truth. As long as both men knew it existed, neither could move against the other without risking total annihilation. This created what intelligence experts call a mutually assured political destruction scenario. Trump couldn't have Netanyahu eliminated, because the document was programmed to be automatically released in the event of the prime minister's death or disappearance. Netanyahu couldn't release the document, because doing so would invite immediate retaliation from the most vindictive man ever to hold the American presidency. The psychological warfare between these two men intensified throughout 2024. Every public interaction was carefully choreographed, every statement double-checked for hidden meanings. When Trump praised Netanyahu in public, insiders knew it was really a warning. When Netanyahu expressed support for American foreign policy, it was actually a subtle reminder of what he could reveal. But the most chilling aspect of this Cold War was how it affected global politics. Other world leaders began to sense the tension between America and Israel, leading to a subtle realignment of international alliances. Countries that had traditionally relied on American-Israeli cooperation suddenly found themselves hedging their bets, unsure whether the partnership would survive if either man decided to pull the trigger on their political nuclear weapon. The document itself became something of a legend within intelligence circles. Some claimed it contained evidence of Trump's involvement in war crimes. Others suggested it revealed treasonous communications with enemy states. A few whispered that it documented something even more sinister, evidence of Trump's role in international human trafficking operations. The truth: it was somehow worse than any of these rumors suggested. As the 2024 election drew closer, the pressure on both men became unbearable. Trump, knowing that losing the election might expose him to prosecution, became increasingly desperate to neutralize the threat Netanyahu posed. Netanyahu, watching Trump's poll numbers rise and fall like a fever chart, knew that his leverage was only as good as Trump's political survival. The final confrontation came in the most unlikely place, a seemingly routine meeting at the United Nations General Assembly in front of dozens of world leaders, diplomats, and journalists. These two men engaged in what observers later described as the most tense diplomatic exchange in modern history. Every word was carefully chosen, every gesture loaded with meaning that only they understood. What was said during that brief exchange? The official transcript records only pleasantries and diplomatic niceties. But lip readers and body language experts noticed something far more sinister. Trump's final words to Netanyahu that day, barely audible above the crowd noise, were, "Tick-tock, Bibi, tick-tock." Netanyahu's response was equally chilling. "The clock stops when I say it stops." The aftermath of that meeting sent shockwaves through both governments. Trump's inner circle reported that he spent the next week in an almost manic state, making calls to intelligence officials and military commanders. Netanyahu's security was quietly tripled, and Israeli cyber warfare units went on high alert. The two most powerful men in their respective countries were preparing for a showdown that could destabilize the entire Middle East. But then something unexpected happened. Something that changed everything and revealed the true genius of Netanyahu's long-term strategy. You see, while everyone was focused on the document's potential to destroy Trump, they missed its real purpose. Netanyahu hadn't been planning to use it as a weapon against the American leader. He'd been using it as bait for a much bigger fish. The revelation came through the most mundane of sources. A leaked email from Netanyahu's office that was supposedly sent by mistake to a journalist. The email, which appeared to be an administrative note about document storage, contained a single line that made international headlines. Operation Mirror Shield, Phase 3 complete. Target acquired. What was Operation Mirror Shield? Intelligence analysts worked around the clock to decode the reference, but the answer was simpler and more terrifying than anyone imagined. Netanyahu hadn't just been collecting dirt on Trump. He'd been documenting the entire network of corruption that surrounded the former president. Every deal, every payoff, every illegal arrangement involving dozens of politicians, businessmen, and foreign agents. The document about Trump was just the tip of the iceberg. Netanyahu's real insurance policy was a comprehensive database of American political corruption that implicated hundreds of powerful figures across both parties. He'd turned his office into the intelligence equivalent of Fort Knox, gathering blackmail material on anyone who might pose a threat to Israel's interests. This revelation transformed the entire dynamic of the Netanyahu-Trump relationship. Suddenly, it wasn't just two men holding each other hostage with mutually assured destruction. It was one man holding an entire political system hostage, while another man desperately tried to escape the web he'd helped create. Trump's realization that he was just one target among many sent him into a fury that his staff described as unprecedented. The man who thought he was engaged in a private war with Netanyahu discovered that he was actually just another name in a vast catalog of compromised American officials. The humiliation was almost worse than the threat itself. But Netanyahu's masterstroke wasn't just the scope of his intelligence operation, it was the way he'd structured it to ensure his own survival. The documents weren't just stored in Israel. Copies existed in secure facilities around the world, accessible only through a complex series of dead man switches that would activate if anything happened to the Israeli prime minister. The beauty of this system was its simplicity. Netanyahu didn't need to threaten anyone directly. He didn't need to make demands or issue ultimatums. The mere knowledge that such a system existed was enough to ensure that powerful people thought very carefully before moving against him. As 2024 came to a close, the relationship between Netanyahu and Trump had evolved into something unprecedented in international relations. A Cold War between allies that was being fought entirely in shadows and whispers. Neither man could destroy the other without risking their own annihilation, creating a balance of terror that kept both in check. The final twist in this story came in the form of Netanyahu's ultimate contingency plan. One so audacious that even his closest advisors were shocked when they learned about it. If anything happened to him, if his government fell, if Israel itself was threatened, the entire archive would be released simultaneously to every major news organization in the world. This wasn't just mutually assured destruction anymore. This was the political equivalent of a nuclear doomsday device. One that would take down not just Trump, but potentially hundreds of other powerful figures and reshape the entire American political landscape. Netanyahu had essentially weaponized transparency, turning the threat of exposure into the ultimate insurance policy. The document that started it all, those 37 pages about Trump's crimes, now seems almost quaint compared to the vast intelligence operation it helped spawn. What began as a simple case of political blackmail had evolved into something far more sophisticated. A system of checks and balances, enforced not by constitutional law but by the threat of total exposure. Today, as both men continue their public roles on the world stage, very few people understand the delicate balance of terror that governs their every interaction. Every handshake is calculated, every public statement carefully vetted, every private moment shadowed by the knowledge that one wrong move could trigger a revelation that would change history. The document still exists, somewhere in Netanyahu's vast archive of American secrets. And Donald Trump, whether he wins or loses elections, remains forever marked as a man whose darkest secrets are held by someone who has made survival an art form. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of this entire affair is what it reveals about the nature of power in the modern world. In an age of global surveillance and digital intelligence, the old rules of diplomacy and statecraft have been replaced by something far more sinister, a game where information is the ultimate weapon, and those who collect it become the shadow rulers of nations. The question that keeps intelligence experts awake at night is simple. If Netanyahu has done this to American politicians, what might other world leaders be hiding about each other? How many similar archives exist? How many other shadow wars are being fought between supposed allies? The answer to these questions remains locked away in vaults and servers around the world, held by men and women who understand that in the modern era, knowledge isn't just power, it's survival itself. But the story doesn't end there. In fact, what happened next would make everything we've discussed seem like child's play. Because Netanyahu's document collection had caught the attention of someone far more dangerous than Trump, someone who operates in the shadows of international intelligence and makes world leaders disappear without a trace. The first sign of trouble came through an encrypted message that arrived on Netanyahu's personal device at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in January 20. The message contained just 7 words: "We know what you have. Cease immediately." But it wasn't the words that terrified Netanyahu's security team, it was the sender. The message had somehow bypassed every layer of Israeli cyber defense and appeared to originate from inside Netanyahu's own secure facility. How was this possible? The investigation that followed revealed something that shook the Israeli intelligence community to its core. For months, possibly years, someone had been watching the watchers. Every document Netanyahu collected, every piece of blackmail material he gathered, every secret he thought was his alone, it had all been monitored by a third party, whose identity remained completely unknown. Netanyahu's paranoia, already at dangerous levels, reached new heights. He began conducting meetings in rooms that were swept for surveillance devices multiple times per day. He started communicating with his closest advisors through handwritten notes that were immediately burned after reading. His sleep patterns became so erratic that his personal physician prescribed medication for what was clearly a stress-induced breakdown. But who was this mysterious third party? The answer came from the most unexpected source, a defector from Trump's inner circle, who revealed something that changed everything. Trump hadn't been operating alone in his attempts to neutralize Netanyahu's threat. He'd been receiving assistance from what the defector described as a group that makes the CIA look like amateurs. This revelation opened up a new dimension to the conflict. Netanyahu wasn't just fighting Trump anymore. He was up against what appeared to be a shadow organization with resources and capabilities that dwarfed even the Mossad. The documents he'd collected weren't just leverage against American politicians. They'd inadvertently exposed a network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of international intelligence agencies. The psychological pressure on Netanyahu became unbearable when he realized the true scope of what he was facing. His wife Sarah later revealed that he'd begun talking in his sleep about puppet masters and invisible enemies. His security detail reported strange incidents, unmarked vehicles that appeared and disappeared without explanation, electronic devices that malfunctioned in his presence, even birds that seemed to follow his movements with unnatural precision. The breaking point came when Netanyahu discovered that his most trusted advisor, the man who'd helped him build his archive of American secrets, had been feeding information to this mysterious third party all along. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was operational. Everything Netanyahu thought he knew about his own security had been compromised from the very beginning. This revelation led to what Israeli intelligence officials later described as the most comprehensive security review in the nation's history. Every member of Netanyahu's staff was subjected to polygraph tests, background investigations, and psychological evaluations. The results were shocking. The infiltration wasn't limited to one advisor. It appeared that multiple members of Netanyahu's inner circle had been compromised, some for years. But the most chilling discovery was what happened when Netanyahu's team tried to access his archive of American secrets. The files were gone. Not deleted, simply gone, as if they'd never existed. Backup systems showed no record of the documents. Security cameras revealed no evidence of unauthorized access. It was as if someone with godlike technological capabilities had reached into the most secure facility in Israel and erased years of intelligence gathering without leaving a trace. The implications were staggering. If this shadow organization could penetrate Israeli security so completely, what else were they capable of? How many other world leaders were dancing to their invisible strings? How many international conflicts, elections, and policy decisions were actually being orchestrated by this unknown puppet master? Netanyahu's response to this revelation revealed both his desperation and his cunning. Unable to trust his own security apparatus, he made a decision that shocked even his harshest critics. He reached out to his old enemy, Trump, and proposed an alliance against their common threat. The irony was perfect. The two men who'd been engaged in mutually assured destruction were now forced to work together for their mutual survival. Their first secret meeting took place in a location so secure that even their own intelligence agencies weren't informed. A decommissioned oil rig in international waters, accessible only by helicopter and swept for surveillance devices by teams from 3 different countries. What they discovered during their conversation would have implications far beyond their personal conflict. Trump revealed that his erratic behavior over the past year hadn't been entirely due to Netanyahu's blackmail. He'd been receiving threats and experiencing security breaches that his own Secret Service couldn't explain. Communications intercepts suggested that someone had been manipulating events around both leaders, perhaps orchestrating their conflict for purposes that remained unclear. The alliance between Netanyahu and Trump created something unprecedented in modern intelligence, a cooperation between Israeli and American resources, specifically designed to identify and neutralize a threat that neither country could handle alone. But their investigation led them into territory so dangerous that both men began to question whether some secrets were too deadly to uncover. What they found in the deepest levels of classified archives was evidence of something that challenged their understanding of how the world really works. A network of influence and control that operated above the level of nations, treating presidents and prime ministers as chess pieces in a game whose ultimate objective remained hidden in shadows that seemed to stretch back decades, possibly longer. The document that started this entire affair, those 37 pages about Trump's crimes, now seemed like a breadcrumb deliberately left for Netanyahu to find, part of a larger scheme to draw both men into a web they were never meant to escape. The question that haunted both leaders was simple but terrifying. If they were puppets, who was pulling the strings? Their investigation continues to this day, conducted in secret facilities with security measures that surpass anything either country has ever implemented. But every answer they uncover leads to 10 new questions, and every thread they follow disappears into a darkness that seems designed to remain impenetrable. The truth about Netanyahu's document, Trump's secrets, and the shadow organization that manipulates them both remains locked away in classified files that may never see the light of day. But for those who understand how power really works in the modern world, the implications are clear. The game is far bigger than any single nation, and the players at the highest level aren't the ones whose names appear in newspapers. In the end, perhaps the most terrifying aspect of this entire affair isn't what Netanyahu and Trump discovered about each other, it's what they learned about the invisible forces that have been watching, manipulating, and controlling them both from the very beginning.